in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And you probably know that Bastiat Society of Raleigh is devoted to free markets, entrepreneurship, private property rights. We're affiliated with the American Institute of Economic Research. You can find out more information by going online at Bastiat Society of Raleigh. Please do consider making a donation of $25 to the Bastiat Society of Raleigh through the Eventbrite link, which you can find through the registration button on the website. Today we have Terry Stoops, who is the director for the Center for Effective Education. He's with the Locke Foundation. You know, Frederick Bastiat himself, he was a fabulous writer. And I don't just mean he was clear and eloquent. I literally mean that he used fables, often to great effect. Three of his most famous fables, the broken window, the candlemaker's petition, and the negative railroad, are part of the intellectual arsenal of any educational defender of liberty. But Bastiat often wrote using examples of this sort because it's really the best way to educate an audience, especially one that does not already agree with your views. One of the most difficult issues we face today is the problem of reforming the mistaken choices of the past, especially in the creation and protection of the mandatory attendance of our children in public schools. Having made that mistake, it would seem that the error, once pointed out, could be easily rectified. But politics doesn't work that way, and as Bastiat noted in his treatise, The Law, as long as it is admitted that the law may be diverted from its true purpose, that it may violate property instead of protecting it, then everyone will want to participate in making the law, either to protect himself against plunder or to use it for political questions will always be prejudicial, dominant, and all-absorbing. There will be fighting at the door of the legislative palace, and the struggle within will be no less furious. The point being that once what economists call rents, or artificial monopolies and subsidies, are created by state action, even of the most well-meaning sort, it is almost impossible to reverse the process. Bastiat thought that state ownership and control of any production process was a bad idea, but state monopoly education is particularly pernicious. Bastiat warns, the person who profits from such law will complain bitterly, defending his acquired rights from rent seeking. Do not listen to this sophistry by vested interests. The acceptance of these arguments will build legal plunder into a whole system. In fact, this has already occurred. The present-day delusion is an attempt to enrich everyone at the expense of everyone else. A very famous Bastiat quote. And on education in particular, he said, the law is not in itself a torch of learning which shines its light abroad. The law extends over a society where some persons have knowledge and others do not, where some citizens need to learn and others can teach. In this matter of education, the law only has two alternatives. It can permit this transaction of teaching and learning to operate freely and without the use of force, or it can force human wills in this matter by taking from some of them enough to pay the teachers, who are appointed by government to instruct others without charge. But in this second case, the law commits legal plunder by violating liberty and property. And Bastiat closes with a sentiment that rings all too true for those of us who today have grown weary and increasingly skeptical of the condescension and constant reforms of our public education monopolists. He says, "Ah, you miserable creatures, you think you are so great. You who judge humanity to be so small, you who wish to reform everything why don't you reform yourselves? That would be sufficient enough. And with that, I introduce Terry Stoops, Director for Center of Effective Education of the John Locke Foundation. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Brad. And I do want to give you two housekeeping notes before I begin. Number one, we have goodie bags outside. Take a goodie bag. Goodie bags with some propaganda literature that we put together, and a cup, and cheap pens and that sort of thing. So please grab a goodie bag on your way out. I have extras if we happen to run out there, but feel free to help yourself. It's a little thank you from the Locke Foundation for you attending this talk today, which is not at the Locke Foundation. So I definitely like to thank Brad and the steering committee for Bastiat for finding this new location and establishing it, at least for now, as our home. And it's a beautiful spot to be in, and it's a pleasure to be the first speaker here in our new location. So thank you so much for that. Second housekeeping issue is that the topic of my talk is school choice, but I want you to feel free during the Q&A to ask me about K-12 education in general. There's so much going on that some of it is directly related to school choice, but so much of it is not, that I'd be happy to have a discussion with you about some of the other things that are going on in public education, because it's an adventure every day, going into the office and finding some new absurdity to think about, write about, speak about. So feel free to bring up other topics other than school choice at the Q&A. So my argument that I'm going to start out with is that there's a little controversy here, but bear with me. We have Bill Clinton to thank for the school choice movement in the United States. William Jefferson Clinton. We have some people here that weren't born when he was president. Be glad that you avoided it. Bill Clinton in 1993, right after he was elected, announced that he had decided to put Chelsea in one of the most expensive, exclusive private schools in Washington, D.C., Sidwell Friends School. And it's easy to forget just how much this decision angered people. After being on the campaign trail for so long and talking about the need to have strong public schools, the desire, along with the National Education Association, to provide more funding for public schools, the necessity of public schools for our democracy, public schools, public schools, public schools, he made the decision to send his 12-year-old daughter to Sidwell Friends. And of course, this happened again with Barack Obama. This is the tale of oldest time as far as hypocrisy from those on the left that claim that public schools are the foundation of democracy, except when it comes to my family, and I will send my child to the school that best meets their needs. In fact, this is what Bill said after he made the decision. He said, as parents, we believe this decision is best for our daughter at this time in her life, based on our changing circumstances. Well, damn! Think about how many other parents would like to have the luxury, the privilege to send their child to the school that meets their child's needs based on their changing circumstances. And so we had an enormous amount of anger brought to bear on Clinton. Everyone forgave him, later on, until they found out other things that were happening in the White House. But it was the first time ideas about school choice really came to the fore, because at this time we were having small-scale experimentation with school choice. We had a voucher program being started in Milwaukee. We had charter schools, an idea that was churning a little bit in Minnesota. So we had state-specific experimentation with school choice, But once the Clintons decided to send their daughter to Sidwell Friends, then parents started to ask the question: if Bill Clinton has the ability, why can't I? Now, school choice in North Carolina has a pretty interesting history. As you may know, during the 80s is really when we started to see the first movement toward greater school choice for North Carolina students. In 1985, we have a decision by the Supreme Court that officially made homeschooling legal. We have in 1996 the charter school bill. Charter schools are public schools. They're provided, they're given public funds, they're exempt from some of the requirements that are imposed in districts. And as we've seen, one of those things that they seem to be exempt from is equal funding. Isn't that right? Because charter schools receive quite a bit less than their district counterparts. And then we had a series of absolutely critical reforms starting in 2011 with the ascendance of a Republican majority in the General Assembly, and then eventually, a few years later, the election of Pat McCrory. That was lifting of the charter school cap, which was absolutely critical into making sure that our charter schools grow. At that point, charter schools were limited to 100 schools, and they could increase their enrollment year by year, but they would have debates. The State Board of Education would have debates about, we have 2 slots for charter schools. Which 2 are we going to pick? And of course, they would either pick the one that looked most like a district school or pick one that was bound to fail but made them feel good. And so we were back to square one with charter schools. And then we had passage of some of the most significant school choice legislation in North Carolina. And this is the private school voucher legislation, the Opportunity Scholarship Program in 2013, the Disability Grant Program in 2013, and the Education Savings Account in 2017. I'll describe each of those, but first I need to give credit where credit is due. The architect and the leader of the efforts to have private school vouchers in North Carolina is with us tonight. It's Skip Stam, Representative Skip Stam. He is retired from the legislature. He was my representative, but also really a mentor. So I think everyone should give Skip a round of applause. And if you think he's not involved anymore, he's as involved as he's ever been in the school choice fight. You know, from his law practice, but still, he always makes time for the Locke Foundation and all the other members of our school choice coalition that we have for making sure that North Carolina's private school choice programs thrive. And they really are thriving. So we had that in 2013 and 2017, and this made North Carolina, I believe, one of the leaders in school choice. We had an expanding charter school sector, an expanding sector for private school scholarships, both for the low-income students, that's the Opportunity Scholarship Program, and for special needs students. Now we have 2 programs for special needs students, and one of them is unique, but the first one that we have is a disability grant. And this is just a voucher for students that have documented disabilities. And it's going away, but don't feel sad about that. It's being merged with the Education Savings Account program, which is also for special needs students. And this is a program that really gives parents the power to direct public dollars to best meet the needs of their children. So let's say you're given an ESA for $9,000. You don't have to spend it all on tuition. You could spend it on a number of qualifying circumstances or expenses to meet the needs of your child. And that means that if they go to therapy, it could pay for the therapeutic appointments. It could pay for devices that your child needs. Anything that's on a list of qualified expenses, you can use this education savings account toward your child's needs. And so this is a really innovative thing. North Carolina is only one of 8 states that have this education savings account idea. There are only 29 voucher programs. North Carolina has 2, and like I said, it'll be down to 1. Now, you may think that when you hear opponents of school choice talk about just how terrible it is, you would think that that school choice really has taken over. And the truth is that school choice still, and by school choice I mean publicly funded school choice, because plenty of people go to private schools or homeschool, is really a small segment of the total student population and a small segment of the total expenditures on public education. So we spend something in the ballpark of about $800 billion on education, K-12 education in the United States. The school choice programs constitute about 0.4% of that total expenditure. So there isn't a takeover. What there is are small-scale programs that are targeting specific populations to ensure that their needs are met. And that has been the movement that we've seen towards school choice that's been politically palpable. And one of the things that we have to remember is that these things need to pass state legislatures. And you have many legislators that are still reluctant, especially if you're in a rural community and the bulk of your support is coming from the largest employer, which tends to be the school system. You tend to be scared off by the sound of school choice. And if you have one private school in your county, you start to think, well, I have more public school employee support than I do private schools, so I'll opt for I won't be as enthusiastic about school choice. An interesting study that came out from the Heritage Foundation found that Republicans are the school choice leaders. These school choice programs that I'm mentioning, especially the private school choice programs, aren't passed through bipartisan support. They're passed through Republican support in state legislatures and in the governor's mansion. So the idea that you need to have a bipartisan coalition in order for a state to pass any kind of publicly funded school choice program is a myth. Jay Green looked back at, Dr. Jay Green from the Heritage Foundation looked back at the legislation, looked back at the votes, and found that many of these bills could have passed without any Democratic support. It's really Republicans leading the charge for school choice, both in the states and making a major push to see some sort of federal legislation that would support school choice as well. I am going to make a prediction that this year, in 2022, North Carolina and its school choice programs are going to hit a milestone, something that absolutely should be celebrated. And if it happens, the celebration is going to be at the Locke Foundation. It's going to be wild. There are going to be drinks, the whole 9 yards. But this is a really great moment in North Carolina, in that 25% of our school-age population will be in schools of choice this year. 25%, which is an absolutely remarkable number when you look just 5 and 10 years ago, where you're barely cracking 10%. And part of that, of course, is due to the COVID-19 and the pandemic. But North Carolina school choice programs were already on the path to this 25% mark. We just hit it a couple years early thanks to the pandemic. The way that it's going to break down is that we'll have in home schools probably 10 or 11% of our public school population, which is huge. If you think about it, right now we have about 180,000 children in home schools. They jumped 20% during the pandemic. And if you're a parent, you understand exactly why that is. Did you really want to put your 5-year-old online for schooling all day? Did you really want to be jerked around by the school district that we're coming back, no, we're going to stay home, you have to stay home, your classmate has COVID, therefore you can't come in? No. So parents just decided to take matters in their own hands and homeschool their children. And homeschooling is easier than ever. You know, when my colleague here, Roy Cordato, did it, you didn't have the internet. You didn't even have telephones and automobiles, right? No, I'm just kidding.
Electricity was
yeah. But homeschooling has really been transformed by the internet because, of course, if you're not qualified, if you don't feel qualified to teach math and science, you have absolute experts online that can do it for you, and you can just help your student out. And I certainly wouldn't feel comfortable teaching math and science to either of my high schoolers, and the internet helps you do that. through either free resources or paid resources. But what we forget is that the General Assembly eased the path toward allowing parents to use these online resources, because there was this bubbling up underneath the surface of some people saying, you know what, I thought parents were supposed to conduct all of their child's education at home, and they're in violation of the law. And so there was this threat that, well, maybe they're going to start taking parents to court because they're going online for classes, and that's not really homeschooling. That is some form of virtual schooling. So what the General Assembly did was decide to change the homeschooling law to make it easier for homeschool parents and to make it so that they have to deliver the bulk of the child's education, but they don't have to deliver all of it. And that was an absolute game changer. And after that decision was made, we saw homeschooling decide to take off. Private schooling is around 6%, and we've yet to see a real explosion in homeschooling, despite the fact that we have private school scholarship programs. We're seeing 1 to 2% increases a year, but we're not seeing an explosion of private school enrollment. Many on the left thought that this whole gambit to provide opportunity scholarships was to fill the seats in private schools. Well, it turned out that you didn't need an opportunity scholarship program to do that. You just needed the pandemic. And that really is what filled the seats of a lot of these private schools. But there was also this need for a supply of private school seats, because we forget that they need to have a school to go to. And that's where last month's speaker, Bob Luddy, has created Thales Academies that are popping up everywhere that are truly filling the need for private school seats at an affordable, almost ridiculously low price. My friend Joey Stansberry back there, his daughter goes to Thales, and she likes it. Thumbs up. You don't need any other endorsement. But a lot of children are finding that Thales is a winner for them. They can take one of these private school scholarships to Thales Academy and have part or most of their tuition covered. I guess most of their tuition covered. Charter schools are around 7 to 8%. We have about, because DPI produces 5 or 6 different student enrollment numbers at any given time, we're hovering around, what, Lee, 125 to 130, 130,000?
133,
Yeah.
It's about 8.8%.
Yeah, depending on which count you use. So it's sort of that ridiculous game that they play. And by the way, I'm going to be calling on every one of you at some point. As you can tell, I don't have the expertise to be talking about any of this, but I know everyone's names, and I can just point and shoot. As far as charter schools go, I'm proud to have been appointed by the Lieutenant Governor to the Charter School Advisory Board, which is one of the oversight bodies for charter schools. We're still subject to the State Board of Education. But I really like to think that we fight for charter schools, and we do everything we power to make sure that we increase the supply of charter schools, because there's a huge demand. Tens of thousands of children want to get into charter schools and can't. And that's it's due to a lot of factors, actually, but 2 that really come to mind. Number 1 is there are caps on charter school enrollment, but charter schools don't receive money for facilities. And they have to come up with that money on their own. It usually comes out of their operating budget. And if you can't build, if you don't have a steady stream of money for facilities, like many districts do, then you struggle to be able to actually build the seats that the children can occupy. I will conclude here by talking a little bit about public opinion, because I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the Civitas poll that recently came out. John Locke Foundation, as you may know, merged with the Civitas Institute. One of the things that Civitas brought with them is the Civitas poll. Every month we poll likely voters in North Carolina to get a sense of how they feel about various issues. January is always the school choice poll because it's school choice week. And I can't emphasize this enough. We were joined by a very special person this school choice week, Roy Cooper, who for the first time ever signed the School Choice Week proclamation. Now, Now, I wrote, and I've been very open about this, we think that it was a mistake, that there was a lower level staffer who had only been in there, in the office since August, signed it, and passed it along to the school choice week folks. We really do believe it's an accident. You know what? It was a happy accident, because I am going to be talking about that for the rest of my life. It was a tremendous moment. It was so much so, and I was quoted in the News and Observer about this. I thought it was someone was playing a joke on me. I thought it was a hoax, and that was the line that Kern Huey from the NNO put in his article. Some people thought it was a hoax. Well, I was that person, but I think in the end it was a mistake. But you know what? For a guy that sent his youngest daughter to St. Mary's School in Raleigh, and we want to talk about some hypocrisy. Not only that, and I'll just throw this in there because I like piling on, but not only did he send his daughter to St. Mary's, which is fine, I'm glad he had the ability to do that, but his wife spoke at a commencement at St. Mary's School in Raleigh. So they are affirming their support for private schools that only they can afford. Thank you, Governor Cooper. A couple things from the Civitas poll before we open it up for Q&A. 78% of voters believe parents should determine where their child attends school. And only 11% think that school boards should do that. This cuts across every demographic. And it's just common sense. You have school boards creating attendance zones based on residences. And if you're looking to meet the needs of individual children, drawing lines around subdivisions and saying that kids in this subdivision have to go to this school, kids in that subdivision go to that school, is idiotic. More than that, if you're a savvy parent, you can exercise school choice of your own by getting into one of those subdivisions that maybe someone else can't afford it. That is the ultimate form of school choice if you're an affluent person, is to make sure that you buy a house in the right neighborhood that's zoned to the right school. 81% agree that parents should have the ability to determine. I don't know, I think we asked the same question twice there actually. Every policy proposal that we put before voters, private school, voucher programs, education savings accounts, and charter schools, had at least majority support. And this cut across demographics as well. Democrats, Republicans, rural, suburban, urban. There is almost uniform support for school choice. And the idea that school choice is controversial, no, it absolutely isn't. Poll after poll shows that voters support school choice. In fact, they support candidates that run on a school choice platform. One of the questions that we always asked was, would you be more or less likely to vote for a candidate that supports the Opportunity Scholarship? This is a voucher for low-income children. And we found that 46%, a plurality, would be more likely to vote for a candidate that supports the Opportunity Scholarship program. And 22% would be less likely. But the interesting part about this question is, if you look at how it's broken down by demographics, African Americans, Asian Americans, Hispanic Americans, all over 60% would vote, support these school choice programs, and most, with the exception of Hispanic voters, would vote for a candidate that supports the Opportunity Scholarship program. So it's not only good educationally, it's good politically, and we are in North Carolina at a tremendous moment in the school choice movement, and we've overcome tremendous odds in order to get here. The momentum is on our side, and it really is a pleasure and an honor to be part of a movement that is changing the lives of children. Thank you. I'm going to step out here a little bit because the right side of my body is roasting. It's tremendously warm, but I like it. I like it. I'm always cold. It's just I have a strange sensation right now where the right side is warm and the left side is not. Now, so let's. Who's got questions out there? We're going to go to Richard first.
Jerry, great talk. You did get a warm reception of this. The last point you made, what is the missing link link between that and either incumbents or candidates taking this position and getting legislation passed?
Fantastic question. One of the questions we ask in a poll is, what are the reasons why you would not support a program, a private school choice program? There is no one factor that rises to the top, but the one that got a plurality of the support, the answers, is the fear of racial segregation. The idea that, and this is an idea that's popular in the media because of the Pearsall plan and other plans that were enacted during desegregation that really did have segregationist roots and used private schools as a way to filter public school students out who wanted to avoid desegregation. There is still this fear that there is going to be racial segregation if you expand school choice beyond a certain point. Now, the public schools are terribly segregated as it is right now. I don't know how it could be even worse, but I will give you some, we do have data on this. And if you look at what the data says, we have 7 studies, 7 gold standard studies that use random assignment. So this is, we tally only the top studies. We have 7 studies that look at the integration question, and 6 of them show that private school scholarship programs have a positive result on integration. And we have 1 that had no effect, and then there are no studies that show there's a negative effect. Those only address the private school scholarship programs. There's still a worry about charter schools. But here's the difference with charter schools that I think is important. And my friend Marcus Brandon kind of explained this to me. He said, you know what? African Americans want their own charter schools because they want HBCUs on the K-12 level. And I said, I never thought of it that way. And so you will find individuals on the left claiming that these predominantly African American charter schools are segregation academies. But you go to one of these schools and every kid, every parent, every teacher loves being there. These kids benefit enormously from being in that environment. And so it's schools like that which skew the numbers, which specialize in a certain racial or ethnic demographic. We'll go with Lee.
Terry, in the list of different types of school choice that you listed and turning the poll, which of those received the lowest approval rate?
It's charter schools. And it's the fear of segregation that always rises when it comes to charter schools. And then, part of this, Lee, and you understand this better than anyone, is still the misconception that a charter school is a private school. We've had charter schools for decades, but we're still having to explain to people that these are public schools.